right. So, hi everybody. It's 7 o'clock. So I am going to go ahead and start. This meeting is being recorded. So, in hopes that we can be able to post it to the Allendale Borough website, and people can at a future time go back and watch this, as well as the two previous virtual meetings. Those recordings are currently up on the borough website. There are places through this presentation where I reference some of the things we talked about in the first two presentations. So it is kind of a build purposely, but this one will be recorded too. So with that, I tried to mute everybody on your way into the meeting, but if for some reason you've become unmute, I would ask you to mute. At the end of the presentation, I am going to attempt to unmute everybody, and we will have a short question and answer period, with the caveat that if I'm not sure I can fully or appropriately answer your question, I will promise you that I will be creating a Q&A sheet that will be posted to be able to answer any questions asked tonight, but also ones that people may email me, which was great the last time. So with that, I will hopefully move forward and say thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Liz Homan. I'm the chair of Water and Sewer. I also am fortunate enough to be the Borough Council President this year, which is exciting. I have alongside me as my second, not virtually, but not actually here physically, Steve Sasso, who is the second on the Water Committee, and we do not do it alone. We have an awesome Water Committee. Mayor Ari Bernstein, who you can see on here tonight, Ron Kistner, who is our Director of Operations, Alyssa Mayer, who is our water collector and also our CFO, Mike Vreeland is our borough engineer. He's from Van Cleef Engineering, and Lane Simon, who's a member of our DPW force. He's also a licensed water resource, and this whole group has been tremendous. So I thank them publicly as much as I can. Tonight, the meeting goals are three, and they're pretty broad. They are first to say, why are we considering changes for Allendale Water? And I'd like to make sure that we can answer that. Second, what are the options that are being considered for Allendale Water going forward? I think as a community, you need to know, what are we pursuing? And then, what are current actions that you all should be educated on as far as pursuing those options? And why do we want to have these meetings? This is the third one. And, it's time consuming to try to produce these slides to simplify some of the complexities to 15 slides, but it's super important because Allendale Water and all New Jersey water systems, quite honestly, the nation and the world as a whole, but we'll talk about all the New Jersey water systems are facing challenges. And so we're not unique in these challenges, but I do believe that we are a little bit unique in the fact that I feel from all of the exposure I've had throughout New Jersey that we are in a good position because we've been thinking, we've been meeting, we've been working, but there are challenges that all of New Jersey and we are facing that we need to discuss, because we need to be transparent. That's super important. My mom today said to me, "What do you mean transparent?" And I thought maybe people don't really know. And really, I want to make sure that we present information out so that you can see what we are doing. But I also want to make sure that there's a window where you can say, I want to look in, I have more questions. So I do want to make sure that we're being transparent. And I want to continue the conversation that we started with the first two meetings on talking about the value of our drinking water, because I want to make sure you all know that we take this very seriously. Like, I try to be smiley and talk about all this, but it's very serious. And we take, everybody on the water committee takes these roles very seriously, as does our current partner, Suez, too. And then I want to make sure that you guys know that I want to hear your thoughts. And I believe that anybody that has emailed me or called me, I have really made the effort to reach back out and try to answer questions or share, quite honestly, that that's something we're still looking at. So tonight it's a lot of information. If you have questions, my email is on the website, but it's simple, Liz Homan, my name, at allendale.nj.gov. So in thinking about the first objective of meeting, why are we doing this? It occurred to me that really our group needed to agree on some Allendale Water challenge statements. And the first one is that they're new required NJDEP drinking water standards, and they are costly to implement. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what just 3 of them are. We spoke in the last meeting about the MCL stands for a maximum contaminant limit, and we talked about these PFAS contaminants that have been in movies and things like that. You could really call them like the Teflon pan things. They're all of those things that were used in non-stick products, that were used in stain resistant products, that were used in firefighting foam. And they are unfortunately out, in the world, and they have come down into the aquifers and the water supply. They're measured in tiny, tiny amounts. They're in parts per trillion, but they are there, and we need to think about that. Those standards have started formally first quarter of 2021. There's also another area, the the service line inventory report. It's actually part of what is the lead and copper rule. And what that is looking at is for water utilities to be able to provide for every connection, of which we have just around 2,600, information on not only the water delivery part of the system that Allendale and other municipalities own, which is the pipes in the street up into your curb box, but also the part that we don't own, which is the part that goes from the curb box into your house. So Allendale and every other New Jersey municipality has never been required to collect data on that. So when a house comes down in Allendale and you go to the building department and you have your permits and they collect information, we know, and I can pull up in the forms, that the water line has been replaced, because it's an ordinance to replace it all the way to the street. But it has not been part of that information to say, well, what was it replaced with? Was it replaced with copper, or was it replaced with a plastic line? And in order to comply with this service line inventory report, BSWE 20 is the form, you have to say what it is. You can't say not lead. So if you don't know if it's lead, if it's copper or it's plastic, then you have to leave it as an unknown. And so getting that form to 100% is something that's going to be very challenging for all municipalities, and we're all talking about it. Then there's a water quality asset plan that's part of the Water Quality Accountability Act, WQAA, and that starts looking at, maintaining and 5-year, 10-year plans. And Allendale needs to, and every other town too, and you hear it in the news, but pipe replacements in the actual streets is something that is expensive, but needs to be done. So that is one of the reasons all these expenses and these regulations, which are great, but the timelines under which we have to comply to them can be very challenging for smaller water utilities. The second challenge, and it's not again something new, but it gets more expensive all the time, is that historically and currently Allendale purchases outside water. So we have 5 wells, but we do not generate enough water through our water permits to be able to supply all of Allendale. So we have to buy water from Suez. It's right currently we pay about $500,000 a year to supply about 50% of our water, primarily during the summer months. And this, again, we used to buy water from Ramsey, then we bought water from Mawa that came through Ramsey. So it's not a new thing, but water gets ever more expensive. And then the third challenge statement that we have, because of everything that's going on, it is a challenge that we do not have dedicated water employees. It was a great decision that we made based upon the financials and the changing requirements of testing and things like that 8 years ago, that we did not expand and have to have all of the equipment and things like that to continue to run our own water department. But with some additional changes of all these things that we have to look at and monitor and reports and fill out, that the hours from, Lane Simon in the DPW, Ron Kistner as Director of Operations, Alyssa as our water collector, and honestly, myself as an elected official, I'm not paid. And, I now, Ari, you can back me up that sometimes I really work full time to, particularly now, trying to make sure that we're understanding what all of our options are. But that's a challenge. So that's why we're looking at what we should do in the future. And the other thing I thought that we should discuss is, what are the objectives for Allendale Water? I'm a resident, I drink the water. What should we be saying we need? What are standards that we need to have? And it's not new, us having these objectives for Allendale Water. They're part of our level of service goals, most of them, that we are required to actually have in a form for the Water Quality Accountability Act. So it's great that they mirror each other. But obviously we would want to have quality water. And I want to make sure I say over and over again, because, when you're talking about concerns, we currently meet or exceed all of the NJDEP water standards, including the PFAS ones. And actually, it's like I say, it's ever evolving and changing, but Waldwick is actually having their first public meeting because they are already in violation of the PFAS with PFOA and PFOS. So we are not right now, but we need to be planning ahead. And it's going to make it more challenging to meet all those standards and have the quality water as a small municipality. Water availability is a standard that we need to have. That's why we have the agreement with Suez, and which is a little bit different than service interruptions because we have to maintain things. But the other objective needs to be a reasonable cost structure. And I chose the word, I said our group, as because we did discuss it, chose the word reasonable, because reasonable is something that says, what are you getting? Is it reasonable to pay this much for my water? And I would say that right now, water is the least expensive utility that homeowners have in Allendale. And, think about what you pay for your gas, for your electric, your cell phone bills. Allendale Water has been very reasonable, and reasonable also needs to be defined by the area that you live in. And the New Jersey Water Watch just created a new site that it's called NJ Water Check. And it showed that actually of our surrounding municipalities that we were the least, an average cost, the least expensive. So we've maintained that for now, but you can see by the challenges that I put forth that we are going, our rates are going to go up regardless of what we do. And then we need to make sure that we have reasonable water interruptions due to infrastructure repairs. We've had at least 5 water main breaks since 2021 started. So that's challenging. And that's part of the reason why pipes need to be looked at. It's also dependent upon, the freeze thaw cycle, which has been challenging. And then the last one, which isn't part of WQAA, but it's part of the reason why I want to have these meetings, is I think that every resident should expect transparency in the challenges and the decision process. And, that's what this is all about. So that was our first portion. Now we're going to move into what are these future options that are under review. And I'm hopeful that I can keep this simple and high level. That's my goal. If there are more detailed questions that are asked, I will try to answer them at the end. And certainly I will follow up with anybody because I love talking about it. It helps me think. So the first one, and this is a slide that I began to create during the second meeting. we would like to retain, the first option is to retain the ownership of the water system. So we would continue our operations and management agreements. We would need to invest in new infrastructure, and we need to replace the aging infrastructure. The second option is really to sell the water system. So I don't want to say be exactly, but it would operate similarly to Rockland Electric and PSE&G. And there are two ways to sell, which I'm going to go over. Really, there's only one that's viable for us, but I want to make sure I share the second one. And then the something else is an idea that I really feel is important for, and our team feels is important for us to pursue. And right now that comes into lease options. Again, probably not something that we feel is wise to pursue at this point, or a shared services. So we'll talk about that. Choice number one, retain ownership. So here we would be continuing the operations and management agreements. And I'm going to talk about the pros. There's really just one, and it's big. And I don't mean by only having one that it is not enough. But the pro really is that we retain ownership and control of this important asset. And that cannot be minimized, and that's why it's bolded there. But that is the pro. We continue to own our 5 wells, we own our 3 treatment facilities, and we own the infrastructure in the streets. Not to be minimized. It has a value, both in monetary numbers, but it also has an emotional value. And I'm going to share that at the beginning of this process 2 years ago, I was like, wow, never think about selling the water system. But as you really get educated and you really think about it, we all have to be open-minded about what is the right decision for Allendale. So pro that's bolded, keep it. What are the cons? Well, the PFOA and PFOS treatment plant, that's going to cost about $2.8 million. There will be increased maintenance costs based upon our feasibility study, currently would be about $67,000 annually, which is about a 10% increase on the current Suez operations and management agreement that we have. And again, Suez didn't give us that 67,000 number. That came from our Mott McDonald feasibility study. And, just for note's sake, that the $670,000 that we pay for Suez, on top of that is our bulk water agreement. And the cons is that these violations could start, again, we're on the borderline. The numbers are 13 parts per trillion and 14 parts per trillion. So that's 13 grains of sand in an Olympic-sized swimming pool, or 14 grains of sand in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. They're small. And so, our numbers have ranged anywhere from 8 parts per trillion to, 18 parts per trillion. We had one test. So, where we're going to end up in the average of a year is going to be close. So we need to have a plan, and we are moving forward. And that is a con, to have to spend that type of money. We're going to have to bond and things like that. And it can be done, though. The service line inventory report, as I talked about, we know about 30% just from information that has been collected at times where we have done streets and notes were taken, but we have about 70% that are unknown, and really they're unknown on the owner's side. And if we needed to do digs to actually identify each of these, it would cost us just under $800,000 in today's dollars. The main replacements in the streets, again, a con for as far as owning the system, that we would need to bear that cost, and it's more expensive for us to do it than potentially someone else. But I want to give the information of that we have about 49 miles of pipe in Allendale, and many of them are aging. And in giving a thought, I need to give an example. So Myrtle has had 2 water main breaks this year. And then we've had one in the downtown area too, kind of feeding from that. But the Myrtle pipe was installed somewhere between 1900 and 1910. And there's about 2016 linear feet. So replacing that pipe in today's dollars would be about $650,000. And there are certainly more pipes that are in Allendale that will require that in the future. And then certainly a con is that it's a con from the standpoint of Allendale potentially continuing to own their own system, is that there will be more regulation. And that's good because we want the cleanest water that we can have. But it is going to come at an increased cost. And then certainly, like I said, we will need to hire water oversight, not to do operations and management, but really to have somebody in the borough that actually is an oversight to that operation and management, the extended testing, all these reports that go into NJDEP, just to make sure that our residents are fully protected. So choice number 2 is to sell the Allendale water system. So here, as I said, there are 2 ways. The first one would be a request for bids or an RFP, which we are pursuing. And we'll talk about that. And then there is some other legislation that was put into place in 2015, and it's called the Water Infrastructure Protection Act, or WIPA. And so we, as a group with legal expertise, talked about WIPA. And there are advantages to WIPA because you can negotiate when you do a WIPA sale. However, in order to qualify to do a WIPA sale, you have to be a distressed system. And Allendale, fortunately, has kept up with maintaining the water towers, replacing pumps. We have no violations. So to say Allendale is a distressed water system, our group felt could potentially really do a disservice to Allendale, because what do you think about a town that hasn't taken care of their water system? That's a different viewpoint than potentially choosing a pathway that says the forward requirements may make it not sensible to continue to own our own system. That is a community that is planning ahead and is taking care of their residents, versus selling through the WIPA. We felt, while it had some advantages, might first of all, we may not qualify for it, and second of all, it might not be the right message to send about Allendale. So I'm going to put an X through that one. That is something that we are currently not pursuing. So let's look at the pros and the cons of selling the Allendale water system. First, I will talk about the cons, and that's the fact that we will relinquish control. So therefore, we would go under, whoever bought us would be under the control and monitored by the Board of Public Utilities, like Orange and Rockland is, and PSE&G. We would also, and we are, let me be clear, looking at what type of fees could there be that we're not aware of, because we currently, do own our own infrastructure. And one of them is a fire hydrant fee and fire pipe fee, stuff like that. So we want to make sure that we look at that. But that's definitely a con. Could there be something else that we're not thinking of? The RFP, the request for bids, is a bidding process. So there is no negotiation, which is challenging coming from a person that's negotiated contracts. But that's the way that the legislation falls for the RFPs. The timing could be challenging. And it's a wonderful thing that an RFP for a water system or a sewer system requires that it go to vote to the public. So it would be in a referendum, and it requires that you would have it during a general election. So if we're looking at 2021, we're already in March, and the general election is in November. So it's timing from a challenging perspective, from a timing perspective. And then lastly, once an asset is sold, an asset is sold. And so that is a con. We need to take this seriously. The pros are that you obviously avoid the $2.8 million investment for the construction of a PFAS treatment facility. And with that, I'll also say all those other costs that we talked about just a few moments ago, of the pipe replacement plan, the reporting, those things. And another pro is that Allendale is not in the business of water. If it's sold, Allendale would be provided by an entity that is in the business of providing water. And, that brings some advantages. These larger private water utilities have great buying power. Therefore, the cost of producing water for them is less expensive. So that may help us with our rates. I mean, Allendale Water makes no profit. We are a zero-sum game. But it is more expensive for us to do it ourselves. In these large private water utilities, they do the water treatment, they do the distribution, and they do the customer service, and they do it on large scales. They have a larger and growing, quite honestly, customer base. So the costs can be spread out over that customer base. And because they can do it for less, the margin of being able to do that is greater. And so for that reason, it takes these larger future unanticipated costs out of the equation. Because I don't know if I said this, that, PFAS, well, it's great, these MCLs, and I'm all for us having to put in treatments to remove any level, even if you're not in exceedance. I don't want to see PFAS anywhere. I want it to be eliminated and taken care of. But the fact is that we started monitoring it, and then we have to implement it, and it's in a short time frame of a couple of years, and that's hard. So possibly not having that type of unanticipated future costs popping up would be taken out of the equation. The other pro is that the process of doing the bidding, we would be putting in a rate stabilization requirement. So we would, at least for a couple years, know exactly how our rates could be increased. And then it would go under the BPU. And any sale would generate monies to pay first our water utility debt, which is about $2.8 million. And then any municipal debt, which helps obviously our entire tax base. So that would be a positive thing. And lastly, a pro, and there certainly could be more on both lists, but it removes the liability from the borough for owning the system and puts it onto this utility that does manage water. So I want to have a big red note out there to make sure everybody is aware that if we received an offer in our request for bids that we felt was reasonable and good for Allendale, the offer would need to be presented to the public for a vote at a referendum. So that's positive. And I want to make sure everybody knows. So the long-term lease that we reviewed as part of the something else, the pros would be, as we talked about, with keeping the system the way it is, you'd retain the ownership. However, in this case, we would not have the responsibility for the duration of the lease. All of that responsibility would go over to whoever had the long-term lease. The cons is that we lose that oversight, and we lose control of the rate decisions. So oversight and rate decisions. And then Allendale would be out. Like, while we've had this operations and management agreement, we've still been involved getting all the reports, paying all the bills, understanding what needs to be spent on any improvement or any repair. In the lease scenario, we would be out of that. And after 10 years, or more, it's an interim step to selling without the gain of getting that initial cash infusion. And from our perspective, you don't know what's going to happen in the market right now. The public, these larger utilities would like to buy a water system like Allendale. So for us, it did not seem like it was a viable option, and we currently are not pursuing that any further. So anybody listening to this presentation, if that's a concern and there's something somebody wants to say, please reach out and contact me. So again, an X for that one. Shared services. Shared services is such a wonderful idea. It's a way of making municipalities more like bigger utilities, in the sense that you can have better buying power, expand ideas. It is very hard, very difficult in practice to actually implement. So I've spent a lot of time looking and pursuing this, and we still are. for sure. And the pros here, and I apologize, this is a little small, but that we would potentially maintain ownership and influence potentially at a lower cost structure than what we have with our operations and management agreements. However, how that would play out, I want to just say that even though we're on the pros, how that would play out is certainly uncertain. And then the other pro, I think, with a shared services agreement is that you can pull out. Like once the system is sold, it's sold. But you can pull out of shared services, not easy. So what are the cons? There'd be a lot of negotiation ahead. We're currently meeting with other water utilities in and around our area, but there would be lots of negotiation to actually put this into place. And it could be really bumpy for residents, and I want to be upfront about that. The borough would still need to monitor the performance of any of those agreements. We could not walk away from that. And the borough would ultimately be responsible for all of the costs and the upgrades that would need to happen for operations and management. And then that brings in that we would need to be responsible for all of these costs that we had discussed before. And we would still be on the hook as a con for these future regulations of the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection and the national level of the EPA and those increased costs. And there again, we would definitely need to have water oversight, so additional employees. So that's the overview of what are we thinking about. It really boils down to three main areas that we're pursuing, and that would be the keeping our system with an operations and management agreement, selling our system through an RFP, a request for bids, or creating some sort of a shared services. So it was hard to whittle down and say, what actions do I want to put on here? Because there's just so much. I think that we have, I think that with this information, we give a good picture as to where we're going on each of these ideas. The first one is that because of the need to pursue the PFAS treatment plant at New Street, we are on the final details of a design and permitting request for a proposal for that New Street plant, and it should be released on March 26th. It's hard to get all those details straight, but that's where we are. We, from a standpoint of continuing to own and do operations and management, I've met multiple times with NJDEP. We've had meetings with the New Jersey Infrastructure Bank and also the Board of Public Utilities for insight and information on regulations, on loans, on loan forgiveness, on possible grants that could be out there. What are rates that the BPU has approved previously so we could expect to continue, which I can share with you is an average of about 5% increases per year. And what type of previous sales have happened? And how have they happened? Have they mostly been WIPA? What's happened? We've hired Dennis Enright from Northwest Financial for evaluation of the system. And Nancy will be happy to hear me share that it was really in large part due to some public questions that said, well, are you going to do evaluation? And and I will say, and then talking with the committee, we agreed that a different approach should be taken. Initially, I thought, let's see what the market bears. I don't know that putting a valuation number is going to be helpful, but it is. And I wasn't sure if it could be public information, but legal counsel has said that until an RFP would go through, that's something that would be kept private. But we need to know what is the relative worth of our system and what's a good deal. And I will share with you that much of that is based upon what type of rate increases can we manage. And then apart from even selling it and knowing what the value might be, it also is a great idea because it helps us look at, well, what are the values of our own rate increases, knowing that our costs to operate are going to continue. How much, how can rate increases help us with those costs moving forward? And asking a question of what can we tolerate? We also hired municipal utilities legal expert Ryan Skirbo from Decoitus, and he's been fabulous already. He's helping provide insight into additional options. He's worked on water and sewer utility sales previously. He's also providing additional professional guidance on the sale documents to make sure that we are protected. Nothing worse than having the perfect bid come in and you'd like to go through with it, but something's been filed incorrectly. And so he's working in tandem with our borough attorney, Ray Wiss, and it's a great team along with our water team. We are working with other municipal water utilities, doing lots of research, having lots of discussions, specifically, Waldwick Water Utility, because it's right next door. That's how I know that they're having their public meeting tonight. The Ridgewood Water Utility, and also the elected officials. I coordinated and then we implemented a March 3rd Northwest Bergen elected officials meeting with NJDEP. And, you can see every elected official is in varying degrees, dealing with these issues. And then, many other discussions with the other municipal water utilities. And then, just as a whole, there's constant water committee meetings with the borough engineer, borough attorney, all of our experts. And it's a lot, but it's fun from the standpoint of I really know that our group is doing what is right for Allendale, and we are doing what Allendale residents should be asking us to do. We haven't made decisions. We're not doing things in a vacuum. We truly are trying to gather as much knowledge as we can, impart it to residents, and move ourselves forward. And with that, I will hope that I have met the objectives of the meeting of providing a high level view into why we're considering changes for Allendale Water, what those options are for Allendale Water going forward, and what our current actions are being taken. So I'm going to give my email again. I'm going to share that we will definitely do a Q&A that will be posted on the web. And hopefully if this recorded correctly, this will also be posted on the web. So I will stop sharing my screen. Oh, this is so fun. There's so many more people on here than were on when I started. All right. I'm not sure if I can, I think I can unmute everybody. I'm not really sure how to do that. Oh no.
I think people can unmute themselves, can't they?
Good. I don't know. This is the one part. Normally I practice all these things beforehand, but I've had a little bit of a
Hey Liz,
couple of days. Yes.
I'm unmuted, so you can unmute yourself.
Good. Okay.
So I would recommend everybody you stay muted until you're ready to ask a question.
Okay. So then I will do that. I think there's a way you might be able to raise your hand.
Yeah, like this.
Oh yeah, that's true. Perfect. Okay. So Steve Sassy, you raised your hand. You got any questions, or you just want to share something extra that maybe I forgot?
No, you did a great job. Liz and I went over this for many hours. So it was a great presentation. And I've seen it so many times, so it's hard for me even to judge at this point, but I know the information.
All right, so, then we'll move on.
Yeah.
Who wants to raise their hand next?
But I do.
Jackie McSwiggan.
Liz, I just can't, I am just in awe of the amount of time and energy and information that you've shared. And I know, I have an inkling, I can't say I know, of what this took to put together and the amount of research and meetings and conversations you've had with professionals to try to provide us with as much information as we can handle in order to help you make this decision. But I just want to thank you. It's just awesome what you've done here. So you've done a terrific job, and thanks.
It's our pleasure. It's the water committee, and it's our pleasure. So somebody else, and if I don't see somebody, Steve, maybe you see. Charisse Frasco, unmute.
I have a question. So when we talk about oversight responsibility and time spent vetting, I'm just wondering how much we can actually hand off. I know from vendor due diligence work in the corporate workplace that we are responsible not only for our own actions, but for those of our vendors. So I'm just wondering, if we hire or give up control, how much oversight do we actually still have to maintain?
So and I may clarify this answer later, but we currently, have Suez as our operation and manager. So, they are tasked with operating and maintaining our system. But ultimately, when there is a technical issue where something like a pump or something like that needs to be repaired, we are on the hook for repairing it. And if you remember when there was a breakdown with the what are called bubblers that removed from one of our wells tetrachloroethylene, and we had to send out, and Allendale needed to host the public meetings talking about, what happened, what was done to fix it. And so, we are still financially responsible, and, we're responsible for who we hire. So while they're responsible for doing it, and certainly we have standards that they have to meet in the contract, we still own the system. Versus if we were, and that's why I say the only option where we unload the responsibility to a company that's what they do as their business is really to sell the system. And then it's just like Orange and Rockland, they're responsible when there isn't gas. I mean, you still come to your elected officials as an intermediary, and we would obviously, both as individuals and as elected representatives of a municipality, would talk with the BPU, the Board of Public Utilities, if there were to be issues. And in talking with the BPU and also with our legal expert, there is a lot that weighs in on that, particularly with water. So did that answer your question?
I think so.
Okay.
I think it would just be interesting to in all of your, metrics that you're gathering to make the decision, it would be interesting to gauge the hours spent, by our municipal team on each different alternative.
Oh, and so, yes, so I feel like I summed it in generality, saying we need to hire somebody else. I mean, I can tell you that the operations and management has really been a full-time job. And my feeling is that if we decide to stay with the operations and management, we would absolutely need to have a full-time person. Right now, we have Liz Homan, who's our water collector, who gets us very small stipend. Lane Simon on the DPW, and he's tremendous, and his work with Ron Kistner is tremendous. He gets a very small stipend. But I think it would, just because there's so many components, and Suez really does do a good job. And I don't want to say they don't, they do a good job. But when it's still your responsibility, learning about PFAS. It wasn't Suez who came to me and said, hey, you know what? Back in 2018, you need to be looking at these treatment facilities. Truth be told, a resident actually emailed me and was like, what about these contaminants? And so I'm like, what about these contaminants? And they were rolling down the pike, but when you own it, it's your responsibility. So it is time. But yes, that is a great thing, is can we actually put that into hours? So thank you.
Thank you.
So Liz, Andre had his hand up for a while.
Oh, Andre, where are you? Hi.
I'm right here. Thank you so much, Liz. Good evening, everyone. This was my first meeting here on Zoom on this water topic. So I just want to go back in history a little bit.
Okay.
So to clarify something in my mind, my parents moved here in 1973. They're no longer alive. However, I do remember that Allendale had its own wells. We had fabulous water. My mother always said this has been fabulous water here. She even used to test her own water back in the 70s. She was very particular, and I guess she was one of the first environmentalists.
Love it.
Okay, so as time went on, we heard as residents the closure of wells due to contamination. And then at some point, the system could not support the amount of residents and the new structures coming in. And then we have this Suez collaboration. It used to be United Water. My question going forward is, no matter what we do, and thank you for that fabulous presentation. Going forward, and I know the work it takes to do this stuff. I'm very familiar with RFBs and RFPs. My question is, are we going forward, are we as a town, whether we share the service, sell the service, or keep the service, going to remediate some of the wells that were closed, or do they remain permanently closed? Because one thing that's never happened since the last years, we never had restrictions in the past. In the 70s, 80s, and 90s, there were never water restrictions here. And then all of a sudden, it seems that every summer, we're at stage 3, you can't. Now, I'm a firm believer that God is responsible for watering my lawn, and I'm not going to
Thank
do
you.
it with a sprinkler system, okay? God grows it, I mow it, okay? However, I think it's a shame that we have to put restrictions on the residents because of lack of something that's God-given in nature. So going forward, are these wells that have been closed permanently off the table? And if it does get sold, who's going to handle those and be responsible for those?
So again, I'll try to answer all you made some great comments. I was walking with a friend of mine the other day who's she said that her parents and were always known by when, kids and family came over, they're like, you have the best water. Allendale is the best water. So some of the wells were closed historically, and I will say that it would be doubtful that any of the closed wells would be reopened. And some of them were, again, I don't have every detail because I've only been here 25 years, but some of them were closed because the remediation wasn't appropriate. And some of them were closed because they actually were taking water from other wells, making those wells less efficient, both here in Allendale as well as in Waldwick. And so whether or not, if one of us were, here at that time, we would have argued, well, tell Waldwick to shut all their wells, but however that decision was made, I don't believe any of those wells will be reopened. It's interesting that you did bring up something. I have had nobody that told me at any time did Allendale actually supply 100% of their water, because originally we took water from Ramsey, and then I know we took water from Mawa. Subsequently, we now take water from Suez. So it's great, because actually that had been one of my questions. Can anybody historically remember when a time where we were ever totally, yes, you remember, we were totally independent. All right, I got to get that into the history books.
So thank you so much. I just wanted to bring that up. It really didn't require an answer, but I hope it's in the back of your mind during the possible negotiations. And on a final note, to make these meetings a little bit more lighthearted, I think our mayor needs to do a joke either before they start or before they conclude. So I'm really missing this from Ari. Thank you so much.
Careful what you wish for, Andre.
Yeah, well, perhaps thank you for that. Well, perhaps Liz, you want to put that to a vote, because he might be a party of one.
Oh no, it's going to have to be a water joke. It's going to have to flow nicely into my presentation.
Well,
otherwise, it's going to be a tidal wave of booze.
Right. Well,
Liz, John Sorensen had his hand up for a while.
Thank you very much.
John, before we go to you, I want to make one just last comment about the water restrictions. The water restrictions, I really do believe the water restrictions, meaning that you'll have to water on alternate days in the summertime. Those we'll continue. And I actually, and this is just Liz Homan, not a water committee. We didn't talk about it. So I think those are relevant because watering every other day, you really don't need to water every day. And water is a precious commodity. And with so many people having pools and sprinkler systems and, wanting to do slip and slides, which is great. All those things are awesome, but having it done in a way that manages the water utilization in a controlled fashion. So I like to not think of it as much as restrictions as I think about it as responsible utilization. And it also, because we are limited in the capacity of water we can hold in our 1,000-gallon tank. And so if everybody watered their lawns at the same time in the middle of the night, the pressure wouldn't be able to keep up. So that's that. All right, John, where are you? I don't
I'm
see
right
you.
here, right here.
Hi,
Hello.
John.
Hi, Liz. Thank you very much for doing this. I have a couple of questions. I think a couple of them are pretty quick. One is, did we ever have a full-time employee who focused on water for the borough?
Answer is yes. We actually had a water department up until about 8 years ago when it just financially didn't make sense to continue to have that.
So it was actually more than one person.
Oh, yes. Yeah, because we had to have dedicated DPW workers. We actually had to have a water operator, which, as a note, water operators are very hard to come by for whatever reason. And I love to get kids at the high school interested in getting certified as water operators. But yes, we had a water operator, a water collector, we had individuals, and it was very expensive, to maintain.
Okay. Next question, you mentioned this 2.8 million for the PFAS treatment. Was that just for New Street or would that cover the whole community?
That's a great question. So what we did was our team went out to bid to have what's called a feasibility study done to see how Allendale could mitigate PFAS in our wells to make sure that we would always stay compliant. And so when it was looked at, we have 5 wells in Allendale, and the one is up on off of Meeker, and that one, the levels are very low. And we did do a study to have that one done, and it would be, if my memory's curving, that one would have to be separate, and it would be, I think it was 1.8 or $2 million, because it would have to be a completely separate system. The other 4 wells, we would actually pipe the water from the West Crescent well down to New Street and then combine all 4 of those wells to have all of the Allendale, the primary Allendale water through a granular activated carbon system. So that's how that water would be done. Suez uses surface water, and currently, believe me, they're looking at how they're going to treat any PFAS anywhere, but their levels of surface water currently are between, I think it's 4 and 7 parts per trillion. So, a little bit lower than what we're looking at.
Okay. And over how many years could a bond be put together to finance that?
Yeah, so we looked at that, and the number that I given, actually, I don't remember if I gave it during the last presentation, but I talked about adding a additional service fee that would be labeled like a treatment fee, because we would run that bond over 20 years. And, utilizing the rates now, the average, we could probably, between $80 and $100 per year as an added service fee would be able to cover that bond. We are, though, looking at, the New Jersey Infrastructure Bank, talking to NJDEP, because there are loans and there can be loan forgiveness up to a certain amount, but it's, there's only 8 given a year, and they're for everything, not just PFAS treatment. So you can imagine all of New Jersey is facing all of these challenges. So did that answer your question?
Yep, it did. And one last one for now. You have said this phrase, if we sell, it's sold, it's sold. Is there no option to have in a sale some kind of an escape clause or a place at which you make a decision, you know what, this was a mistake, we're going back to our own?
That I'm not going to answer that now, because we'll be meeting with Ryan to ask that again, to refresh my memory on that. So I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else waving your hands, jumping up and down, telling a joke? Well, then I'll say thank you so much. If anybody does think of any other questions or anything that they just think, well, you know what, it might be great if you explain this, please email me, Liz Homan at allendalenj.gov. And I will definitely put up the acronyms sheet as well as a Q&A. And I really thank you. And I hope it was clear. I know I feel like I ramble on.
It was awesome, Liz. Thank you so much. It's so important. So thanks for being so clear.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Have a great
Good
day.
night.
Thanks for
Thanks,
my
Liz.
work.
Thanks, Liz.
Good job,
Good
Liz.
joke.
Bye. A joke. A water
All right,
joke.
okay, all right. So
Bye.